Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a little bit different from my other videos on net. This video I am making using my own notes. I will show you my notes about metaphysical poets, and I will use Bengali and English language to make the concept clearer. So, first let's talk about the term metaphysical poet. I have seen many students tending to memorize the features of metaphysical poetry, and they often feel that metaphysical poetry is very obscure. আর এই অবসকিউরিটিটাই মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রির একটা বিশেষ ফিচার। ওকে, অ্যান্ড ইফ ইউ ডিগ ডিপার, ভালো করে পড়লে দেখা যাবে মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি ইজ ওয়ে ahead of its time. It has a modern sensibility to it, a postmodern sense of chaos and order to it. এর মধ্যে যেরকম আধুনিকতার ছোঁয়া রয়েছে, ঠিক সেই রকমই আধুনিকতার পরবর্তী যুগের মানে কন্টেম্পোরারি সময়ের যে একটা ডার্কনেস, যে অবসকিউরিটি, যে বোধ, সেইগুলোরও কিন্তু একটা স্পর্শ এর মধ্যে পাওয়া যায়। এটা টোটালি আমার নিজের এক্সপিরিয়েন্স অফ রিডিং মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি। মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি নেট পয়েন্ট অফ ভিউ থেকে খুবই ইম্পর্ট্যান্ট, কারণ প্রত্যেকবার মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি থেকে মিনিমাম দুটো প্রশ্ন আসেই। মিনিমাম 2 questions are sure to come in net examination every year. Be it essays on metaphysical poetry. মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি সম্পর্কিত এসে বলতে গেলে আমাদের মাথায় আসে তিনটি নাম। একটি হলো স্যামুয়েল জনসন, একটি হলো জন ড্রাইটন, আর আরেকটি হলো টি.এস. এলিয়ট। তিনজনেরই মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি সম্বন্ধে ধারণা আলাদা আলাদা, যেখানে স্যামুয়েল জনসন আর জন ড্রাইডেনের মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি সম্পর্কে ধারণাটা দুজনেই নেগেটিভ ধারণা রাখেন, আর T.S. Eliot kind of defends the metaphysical poets. সেগুলো আমরা একটু করে আলোচনা করব। তার আগে আমরা চেষ্টা করি মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রিটাকে একটু ডিফাইন করার। মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি এমন একটা জনরা অফ পোয়েট্রি যেটার মধ্যে রয়েছে ফিলসফি, স্পিরিচুয়ালিটি, physical aspects of living, এর সমস্ত কিছুর একটা ইন্টিগ্রেটেড অ্যাপিল। আর মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রিকে চেনা যায় একটা দিকেই, মানে একবারে আমরা মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রিকে চিনতে পারি যদি আমরা দেখি যে there is a lot of apparently shocking association of different imageries. For example, আমরা যদি জন ডানের দ্য রেলিক পোয়েমটা দেখি, দ্য রেলিক is a very very important poem that students often neglect, but there are questions that come from this poem. And he that digs it spies a bracelet of bright hair about the bone. So the whole imagery of a bracelet of bright hair, উজ্জ্বল চুল দিয়ে তৈরি একটা ব্রেসলেট, we can never imagine such imagery. How can a bracelet be made of bright hair? So we are apparently from the very first reading shocked with the imagery that is used. Therefore, we can very surely say that this is a metaphysical poem. Or suppose take this poem, the very like the signature metaphysical poem, that is a valediction forbidding mourning. We know there an image of the compass is used. So to express love, to express two lovers' bond, the poet uses an imagery that is far away from love. ভালোবাসার সাথে যেটাকে আমরা আপাত দৃষ্টিতে সম্পর্ক স্থাপন করতেই পারি না, কম্পাসের সঙ্গে দুজন লাভার্সের একটা comparative study. So from this we can recognize a metaphysical poem. I hope this is a little bit clear to you. So this is a very basic introduction I'm giving to you all, those who are starting off with metaphysical poets, metaphysical poetry in general, for those to make the concept a little clearer and easier for you. এরপর আমরা চলে আসি কথাটাই, অর্থাৎ মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি। হোয়াট ইজ দ্য মিনিং অফ মেটাফিজিক্যাল? মেটা মিন্স বিয়ন্ড অ্যান্ড ফিজিক্যাল মিন্স anything related to physical or the worldly. So metaphysical means beyond physical, অর্থাৎ শারীরিক aspects or পার্থিব সমস্ত কিছুর ঊর্ধ্বে, যেটা যে কবিতা পার্থিব নানা দিকের ঊর্ধ্বে গিয়ে কথা বলে, সাধারণ ডে টু ডে এক্সপিরিয়েন্সের ঊর্ধ্বে গিয়ে কথা বলে, তাই হলো মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি। When you are reading a metaphysical poem, there are a lot of questions that might come to your mind, like, well, what am I reading? Am I reading a poem about the world? About life? What is life? Is our world real? Is there an afterlife? Afterlife is a very important theme in the poems of John Donne, Vaughan and Herbert. Is God there? Does God exist? Is love itself the Almighty? Is love the supreme power? Can souls travel through time? Is love beyond time and space? Are we restricted to our bodies? Do our bodies define us? Or there is something beyond that? So these are some questions that might come to your mind if you study metaphysical poetry deeply. And if you try to memorize the features of metaphysical poetry and try to just memorize some lines from metaphysical poetry, read just some metaphysical poets to be important, then these questions will not come to your mind, and you might not be able to answer questions, research based and baffling questions that might come in your NET, SET or GET exams. First, the criticism of metaphysical poetry started with John Dryden's who censored Donne for affecting the metaphysics. Okay, so the term metaphysical was not used by John Donne or any metaphysical poet. The term metaphysical was first used by Samuel Johnson. Many people make mistake here, so let me be very clear. Metaphysics কথাটা first use করেছিলেন John Dryden in talking about John Donne and about the censoring of John Donne. আর Samuel Johnson use করেছিলেন এই টার্মটা, the metaphysical poets, in his Life of Abraham Cowley. Then in the 20th century, in 1930s and 40s, another wave of new interest in metaphysical poetry came in. আর টি.এস. এলিয়টের যে সবথেকে important essay on metaphysical poets, the essay is titled as The Metaphysical Poets, 1921 অর্থাৎ 1921 এটি পাবলিশড হয়। এটা মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েটসকে ডিফেন্ড করে, যেখানে ড্রাইডেন ও স্যামুয়েল জনসনের কাজ মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রিকে ক্রিটিসাইজ করেছিল খুব শার্পলি, খুব হার্শলি। স্যামুয়েল জনসনের খুব ইম্পর্ট্যান্ট কোটটা এখানে, very important from net point of view. Samuel Johnson said that John Donne's poetry, in John Donne's poetry, heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. Yoked by violence together. Like they are forcibly yoked together. জোর করে মিলিয়ে দেওয়া, জোর করে ভায়োলেন্স দিয়ে, ফোর্স দিয়ে, নানা রকম ইমেজরি যেগুলো একটার সাথে আর একটা আদতেই যায় না সেগুলোকে মিলিয়ে দেওয়া। সো এইরকম হার্শলি ক্রিটিসাইজ করেছিলেন স্যামুয়েল জনসন জন ডানের পোয়েট্রিকে এবং মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি ইন জেনারেল। কিন্তু টি.এস. এলিয়ট এই ধারণাগুলো ভেঙে দিয়ে বললেন যে না, টি.এস. এলিয়ট অ্যাকচুয়ালি হার্বার্ট জে.সি. গ্রিয়ারসনের যে মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি নিয়ে একটা অ্যান্থোলজি বেরিয়েছিল, অ্যান্থোলজিটার নাম মেটাফিজিক্যাল লিরিক্স অ্যান্ড পোয়েমস অফ দ্য 17th সেঞ্চুরি। এই এসেতে এলিয়ট এই অ্যান্থোলজিটার উপর একটা রিভিউ অ্যান্ড অবজারভেশন করেছিলেন। সেখানে উনি আর্গিউ করেন যে দ্য ওয়ার্কস অফ দিস মেন এমবডি আ ফিউশন অফ থট অ্যান্ড ফিলিং দ্যাট লেটার পোয়েটস ওয়ার আনএবল টু অ্যাচিভ বিকজ অফ আ ডিসোসিয়েশন অফ সেন্সিবিলিটি, which resulted in works that were either intellectual or emotional, but not both at once. So 17th centuryতে যখন মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েটসরা লিখছেন, তখন মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েটস কথাটা খুব পেজোরেটিভলি ইউজ করা হয়েছিল, খুব মিন প্রমাণ করার জন্য। কিন্তু টি.এস. এলিয়ট যখন এগুলো নিয়ে কথা বলছেন, তখন মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েট্রি এবং মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েটদের যে ক্যাপাবিলিটি অফ ফিউজিং দ্য ইন্টেলেকচুয়াল অ্যান্ড দ্য ইমোশনাল, দ্য ক্যাপাবিলিটি of them to bind together the familiar and the unfamiliar, the worldly and the spiritual, the mundane and the supreme, the philosophical and the physical, এই যে একটা মিংলিং, একটা ফিউশন, এইটা becomes very vital and very appreciated. আশা করি আমি কিছুটা আইডিয়া দিতে পেরেছি। এবার আমি খুব ব্রিফলি প্রত্যেকটা মেজর মেটাফিজিক্যাল পোয়েটসকে নিয়ে আমি যে নোটটা বানিয়েছিলাম, সেই নোটসটা আই উইল শো ইউ অল। সো ফার্স্ট, জন ডান। আই হ্যাভ মেড নোটস লাইক দিস ইন অর্ডার টু জাস্ট গিভ ইট আ গ্লিমস অ্যান্ড টু মেক আ মাইন্ড ম্যাপ। আমি আগের ভিডিওগুলোতেও বলেছি যে মেকিং আ মাইন্ড ম্যাপ ইজ ভেরি এসেনশিয়াল, কারণ পরীক্ষা হলে গিয়ে it becomes very difficult to remember all the informations. তখন যদি আমাদের মাইন্ড ম্যাপ থাকে, আমরা যদি এক্স্যাক্ট জিনিসটা মনে নাও করতে পারি, হাইলাইটার দিয়ে এবং এটসেট্রা দিয়ে এরকম একটা চার্ট মতো বানিয়ে নিলে it becomes very easy for us to remember. So John Donne is the king, the central figure in metaphysical poetry. So এখানে কিছু ইনফরমেশন দেওয়া আছে টোটালি নেট পয়েন্ট অফ ভিউ থেকে লেখা। নানা সময় নানা রকম যে প্রশ্নগুলো এসেছে নেটে জন ডান থেকে, সেগুলোর বেসিসে, এবং জন ডানকে নিয়ে আলাদা আরও অন্য যে মেজর ইনফরমেশনগুলো আছে সেগুলো। সো জন ডানের মেজর কাজগুলো হলো আ ভ্যালেডিকশন, ফরবিডিং মর্নিং, songs and sonnets, very important. In Eliot's Whispers of Immortality, John Donne's poems have been John Donne has been invoked. John Donne has written this poem Death's Duel, where he has anticipated his own death. Probably a few years back there was a question in net, who was a poet who anticipated his own death in the poem Death's Duel? So the answer will be John Donne. He also, most of the metaphysical poets and the cavalier poets, I will come to cavalier poets very soon after this. So they use the carpe diem motif, or seize the day. I don't know if you all have watched the movie called Dead Poets Society. ওখানে কার্পে ডিএম or seize the day এই মোটিভটি ইউজ করা হয়েছিল। যিনি প্রফেসর, he was talking about a poem, gather the rosebuds while you may. So while you have time, যতদিন সময় আছে, just enjoy, because seize the day, enjoy the day to the fullest. That was the motive. He used the conceits or the wit, and the conceits are very important in metaphysical poetry. Browning credited to influence dramatic monologue. So Browning said that John Donne influenced him in writing dramatic monologues. Now, Holy Sonnets or Divine Meditations. This was published in 1633, and it is a compilation of 19 poems, which is very important. So, Holy Sonnets and Divine Meditations. This is one of the major works of John Donne. I would request you all to read these poems if you are interested in poetry. Just give a read to these poems. It has 19 poems, and in the 16th poem number 16, sonnet number 16, John Donne talks about the death of his wife. He wrote another poem called To His Mistress Going to Bed, which is also very important. So he takes a very mundane idea, a very daily experience, that his mistress is going to bed, and he is making a supreme philosophical, conceited, wise, metaphysical poem out of it. So a quick information, there was a question in net that in which poem does John Donne talk about suicide, and the answer is By Thanatos. In the poem By Thanatos, John Donne talks about suicide. Coming back to his other very important poems, first is The Flea. It's very, very important. The closing lines and the opening lines of these major works are very important. The closing lines and the opening lines. So the closing line of The Flea is, finds not thyself nor me the weaker now. It is true, then learn how false fears be. So if you are familiar with the closing line, suppose there is a question that, then learn how false fears be. So if you just note down the closing lines and the opening lines of, this is opening lines, mark but this flea, and mark, this is very easy to remember because there is the word flea written on it, so you can always just it will click on your brain that it is the line, the opening line of the poem Flea. So mark but this flea, and mark in this how little that which thou deniest me is. And this is very important. Let's not to that self murder added be. And there are 3 murders that are talked about. 3 murders that are talked about: the murder of the flea, the murder of the love, and the murder of the probability of the lovers being together forever. Sun Rising, this is the next poem. It was published in 1633, and it mentions the King James I. So the poem Sun Rising has, you always notice the spelling of sun also, S-U-N-N-E. So it mentions the king will rise. The king will rise. Suppose there can be a question that The king will rise in the poem Sun Rising. John Donne refers to which king? This is James the First. Again, opening line. I have done this for every major work. I have noted the opening line and the closing line. Busy old fool, unruly son. This is also a mnemonic to remember that the word sun is mentioned here, so it will be the first line of sun rising. And the closing line is very important. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy centre is, these walls thy sphere. And here she is all states and all princes, both the Indias of spice and mine. Okay, so the very colonial imageries are there, I would say. Go and catch a falling star. We can see a very negative sort of feeling of John Donne about women. He says that nowhere lives a woman true and fair. Perhaps he was lovelorn, perhaps he was hurt in some unsuccessful love. The yeah, there are some imageries that are very shocking and very unusual, and I have noted those imageries here. First is catch a falling star or meteor, to impregnate a mandrake root, bringing the past to the present, find out why devil has cleft foot, to hear mermaid singing. So this imageries, devil's cleft foot, mermaid singing, impregnating a mandrake root. Okay, so these are very unusual imageries that are used in this poem. And he says that these are the 5 things that are impossible, as is impossible to find a woman who is beautiful and faithful. So he says that you can rather go for this rather than go for a woman who is go find a woman who is fair and beautiful. So a woman can't be fair and beautiful at the same time. It is as impossible as doing this. Canonization. I will greatly recommend this poem. It was also published in 1633, and it has some very famous lines, and these lines, some phrases have been used in future book titles and essay titles and poem titles also. So yeah, this one. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me laugh. I'm sure those of you who are familiar with poems and metaphysical poetry have definitely heard of this line. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me laugh. Or chide my palsy or my gout, my 5 grey hairs or ruined fortune flout. With wealth your state, your minds with arts improve. This is the opening line of this beautiful poem. There's a very important line here. We can die by it, if not live by love. So love is something that can kill us rather than let us live. Well, here this paragraph is very important. We will build in sonnets pretty rooms, as well a well-wrought urn becomes the greatest ashes as half-acre tomb, and by these hymns all shall approve us canonized for love. So well-wrought urn, we know it is a canonical work by Clint Brooks, the neocritic. I will make a separate video on literary criticism and literary theory also. So Well-Wrought Urn is a legendary work by Clint Brooks, and it was taken from this poem. There are imageries of eagle and dove and phoenix. These 3 birds are mentioned here. So there, innate this kind of questions to come, that what are the birds that have been mentioned in the poem, the canonization, the birds that are eagle, the dove and the phoenix. And the closing line are closing lines are countries, towns, courts, bake from above a pattern of our love. Then the relic, যেটার লাইনটা আমি প্রথমেই বললাম, and he that digs it spies a bracelet of bright hair about the bone. ম্যারি ম্যাগডালেনের মেমোরিতে এই পোয়েমটা লেখা হয়েছিল. দ্য ওপেনিং লাইন ইজ when my grave is broke up again, some second guest to entertain. And the closing line, all measures and all language I should pass, should I tell what a miracle she was. And he is talking about Mary Magdalene. Like that, death be not proud, a valediction forbidding mourning, the good morrow. Religious works are there like Batter My Heart, Three-Person God, Devotions upon Emergent Occasion, Death's Duel, Anatomy of the World, a Nocturnal upon St. Lucy's Day being the shortest day, Progress of the Soul, Twickenham Garden. These are very, very important works by John Donne. Especially Death Be Not Proud, a valediction of forbidding mourning, যেখানে লাভার্স আর কম্পাসের ইমেজারিটা ইউজড হয়েছে এবং এটা প্রত্যেকবারই কোয়েশ্চেনটা আসতে থাকে, দ্য ইমেজারি অফ লাভার্স অ্যাজ কম্পাস. ওকে, even this also, the good morrow, my face in thine eyes, thine in mine appears. এটা কোন কবিতার অংশ? This is also a very, very frequent question in NET. Then we have Henry Vaughan, who was considered as jack of all trades, okay, and he was the first person to use slant rhyme or half rhyme. His important works include poems with the 10th satire of Juvenal, Englished, Scyllax Scintillans, Mount of Olives, or Solitary Devotions. He has a very beautiful poem written, that is They All Are Gone in the World of Night, where he actually laments the death of his old friends. He has other important poems like Christ's Nativity, Retreat. Retreat has a very similarity. Retreat has a similarity with Prelude. Corruption, The Morning Watch, and Peace. Then we have Richard Crashaw. Richard Crashaw, I will show you. I don't know if you can see it clearly. Richard Crashaw was called as the other Herbert, or the second merchant of our times. He has written a very, very important book called A Book of Sacred Epigrams. And he has written a few poems like Poems on Christ's Life and Miracles. These are religious poems. Catholic Church and Ceremonies, Saints and Martyrs of the Church, several sacred themes such as translations of the Psalms. He had a collection of poems dedicated to Saint Teresa, most probably in NET 2017, I guess. A question was asked that it was asked that who was the saint to whom Richard Crashaw dedicated his poems. This is Saint Teresa, and his collection of poems were dedicated to Saint Teresa. It was a hymn to Saint Teresa, an apology for foregoing him, and here we have the imagery of flaming heart. Abraham Cowley wrote on the death of Mr. Crashaw, and there he addressed him as the saint. And here another important thing is that Richard Crashaw একটা পোয়েম লিখেছিলেন, পোয়েমটার নাম স্টেপস টু দ্য টেম্পল, যেটা একটা রেভলিউশনারি পোয়েম হারবার্টের দ্য টেম্পল, এইটাকে ইনফ্লুয়েন্স করেছিল। হারবার্টের কথা বলতেই লেটস গো টু হারবার্ট নাও, জর্জ হারবার্ট. So Richard Baxter, who was the biographer of George Herbert, he said, Herbert speaks to God like one really believes in God, and whose business in this world is most with God. Okay, heart work and heaven work make up his book. This is said by Richard Baxter. Vaughan called George Herbert the most glorious saint and seer. George Herbert was the one who wrote typographical poem. Typographical poem means the pattern, the structure of the poem is in sync with the subject of the poem, like the altar and Easter wing. The altar poem, if you read the poem The Altar, you will see that the pattern of the poem is, it is written, it looks like an altar. The Easter wing, it looks like the wings. The poem, if you look at the poem superficially, it looks like the wings. The temple, a priest in the a priest to the temple, are consecrated to the memory of my mother. Sorry, it will be a poem consecrated to the memory of my mother. This is a very important work because it was the only work to be published in his lifetime. All the other works were posthumously published. The Collar is an important poem by George Herbert. Discipline is also an important poem by George Herbert, because this line has come in Nate, that, oh my God, take the gentle path, throw away thy rod, throw away thy wrath, oh my God, take the gentle path. We also have the poem called the Agony, where he talks about Christ's physical agony, and in this poem, love is love in that liquor sweet and most divine, which my God feels as moving on to